I use styrofoam to make a faux rock wall, and in this video I'm going to show you exactly how I did it. Now I'm going to be using a 4x4 piece of sheetrock, but the first thing we'll have to do is prime it. I'm going to be using a urethane modified primer, which is a high bond primer. Additionally, I'll be adding some quartz sand. The quartz sand is going to help us later on to make sure that our product properly sticks to the wall. You want to make sure that you mix the sand and primer thoroughly so that when you're applying it, it spreads nice and even. I mixed the primer for about 2 minutes, and now I'm ready to apply it to the sheetrock. Now it doesn't matter what pattern you use to apply your primer, but you want to make sure that you cover the entire area. Here I'm just making sure that the quartz sand is covering the entire surface, because again, this is what's going to help our product stick. Now once the primer dried, I went ahead and projected a reference image onto the sheetrock just to give myself a general guideline. Now this is the reference picture that I'll be using. Again, this is not to be super accurate, just to kind of give myself an idea of what it should look like. Now I'll be using regular styrofoam board that I picked up at the hardware store, and this is what I'm going to use to start building up the rocks. I'll start off by cutting the board into small pieces, which are going to be the base of the rock. Then I'll take my blade to remove the edges just to give it a more natural look. Now once I'm happy with the shape, I'll use this expansion foam to glue the piece into place, and then I'll be adding some screws to make sure that it doesn't move. I'm just using regular sheetrock screws to keep everything in place. Now once I have everything in place and kind of where I like it, I'm going to go ahead and use my blade just to touch up these edges a little bit before I start moving to the next step. Now I'm pretty happy with how everything looks, and my next step is going to be priming everything using the same primer and quartz mix we used earlier. Now once your primer is dry, this is kind of what it should look like. If you look close, you can see the quartz sand, and you want to make sure that it's covering the entire surface. This is what's going to help our stucco stick to the wall, so you want to make sure that you're hitting all the creases and crevices. I went ahead and mixed up my stucco. Now I'm ready to apply it. I'm going to start off with a thin layer, and then I'm going to build up on top of that. Now this stucco has a work time of about 3 hours, so I'm taking my time doing this, making sure I'm getting all of the surfaces and making sure I'm really getting into these edges, these creases, the crevices. You want to cover as much as you can. I'm working in small sections, and once I have a section covered, I'm going to go ahead and add this mesh to it, which is going to help us add thicker layer of stucco. Now to help me prevent this mesh from moving around when I'm working with it, I'm just using some regular drywall screws and some regular washers just to lock everything in place. And now I'm ready to add some more stucco and really start building up these rocks. My second mix of stucco is going to be a much thicker consistency. This is what I'm going to use to build up the rock more and start adding some edges, some little definition of what the rock's going to look like when it's done. Now I'm not looking for perfection here, but I want to get it as close to the finished look as possible. Later on I'm going to come back and start adding some detail, but for now I'm just really trying to build everything up. After letting everything dry for about 4 to 5 hours, I come back and start carving out some details. Here I'm using a 1-inch putty knife to add some details. I'm looking at my reference photo just so that I can see what natural stone looks like, just so that I can mimic it and kind of get it as close as possible to looking real and authentic. Once I'm happy with everything, I'm gonna go ahead and dust everything off. I'm gonna get rid of all the debris and the loose stuff right here, and I'm gonna add a sealer / primer. Now the stucco is very porous, so what I'm doing here is I'm just sealing everything so that the paint doesn't just suck into it and I don't waste a bunch of it. also what's gonna do, it's gonna help it adhere to the stucco. Now let's start mixing up our base color. I'm just using a flat white acrylic paint. I added a little bit of black to it to get this medium dark gray. Now this medium gray is going to be the base color of everything, and from here on out I'm going to add highlights, which are going to be lighter grays, some darker grays, a little bit of black, and whatever I feel is going to make it look as natural as possible. Now there's many different ways that you can apply this paint. You can use a sponge, you can use a paintbrush, a roller, you can even use a paint sprayer, whatever works for you. Since this is only a small sample board, I'm using a brush and a sponge to apply the paint. Now in order to really get into these cracks, I added a little bit of water to my paint, which made it much thinner and much easier to flow right into those spots that it wouldn't reach before. Now while that dries, I'm gonna go ahead and mix up the highlight gray, which is my base white again, with less black than before. And as you can see, it's a much lighter gray, and that's gonna bring out the details even more. Now you can use as many colors as you see fit. I ended up using, I wanna say about 5 different shades of gray, some black, and a little bit of white to create all of these peaks and valleys. And I even ended up adding some browns and some blues. There's really no limit, and if you just look at nature, there's a bunch of colors that you can use, and it's really up to your personal preference and what you like. Now as I'm going, I'm adding textures to it. I'm using a sponge, a paintbrush. Here I'm even using a Brillo pad to add some extra highlights to it. Now here's what the final product looks like, and I'm really happy with it. I think this is going to look great in the bathroom or a study or just as an accent wall behind the TV. And the beautiful thing is I can use different colors with this. I can use brown stones, I can use black stones, whatever will go good with the decoration or the overall aesthetic of the house.